Thank you for being here. It's a real pleasure to be here in Amsterdam, invited by the Open Foundation and the students of Anthropology, and to have been introduced by Arno. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to try to give you the best of my knowledge. I've been asked to speak about anthropology and ayahuasca, Western science, and Amazonian shamanism, so that's going to be the subject. I think when one is dealing with a complicated question, it's often interesting to rewind the tape of history and to look at how things developed through time. So I'm going to try to put it all in an hour, and then when it's done, I look forward to dialoguing with Arno. I'm sure there are lots of people in this room who have lots of things to say, so I feel privileged to have an hour, and I'll just give you my stuff. So, rewinding the tape of history goes like this. 500 years ago, Europeans began spreading out around the world, and in many places they came upon people who claimed to communicate with the spirits of plants and animals, and visions and dreams. And these people had different names in different languages. Piaye, Angakut, Arendilanes, or shaman. And they had different techniques to attain modified states of consciousness, such as fasting, ingesting hallucinogenic plants, or playing hypnotic music. The Europeans who came from countries such as Spain, Great Britain, Russia, France, and Germany called them sorcerers, jugglers, ministers of the devil, and other often derogatory terms. For lack of a better word, the Siberian term shaman was imported into European languages. It came via Russian into German, and from there into English and French. This importing of a Siberian term from the Tungus language was due to the economy of knowledge in the 17th and 18th centuries. In those days, the brain drain went east rather than west, and the Tsars of Russia were the most generous patrons of science and hired European intellectuals in their effort to extend and understand their empire. So, for example, in the 1730s, the German professor of botany and chemistry, Johann Gmelin, spent a decade exploring eastern Siberia for Peter the Great, and returned with a written description of a seance conducted by a Tungus shaman, which he described as hocus pocus. The first written definition of the term shaman was provided in 1765 by Denis Diderot and his colleagues in their encyclopedia, which is the first encyclopedia ever written. According to this definition, shamans are, quote, impostors who claim to have an influence on the devil, whom they consult to learn about the future, cure illnesses, and perform tricks that seem supernatural to an ignorant and superstitious people, unquote. The encyclopedia of Diderot was a cornerstone of the Young Rational Project, the goal of which was to understand the world through reason. Its method consisted in separating reality into elements and then ordering them, measuring them, and defining them. The word rational comes from the Latin ratio, meaning computation. To the early rationalist observers, the hallucinated activities of shamans seemed to be the contrary of true knowledge, and they felt the need to distance themselves from the irrational, which they considered as a kind of anti-science. It took the birth of anthropology during the second half of the 19th century for academic observations of shamans to shed some of this bias. As German-American Franz Boas pointed out in 1901, he's one of the founding fathers of anthropology, in order to understand other cultures, anthropologists have to take into consideration the biases of their own culture or run the risk of projecting them onto their object of study. For Boas, anthropologists had to learn how to do two things at the same time: observe others in their otherness and become aware of their own gaze. Two things at the same time. So anthropology is a difficult sport. Well, prior to the advent of anthropologists, several Western scientists had traveled to the Amazon, met indigenous shamans, and drank ayahuasca or yahe or capi. In 1851, English botanist Richard Spruce found himself in the upper Rio Negro area of the Brazilian Amazon and drank ayahuasca and provided a written account of his experience in 1874. He only drank a small quantity and missed the true experience, and after a while retired to his hammock and drank a cup of coffee. The first written account of a first-hand ayahuasca experience was provided in 1858 by Colombian geographer Manuel Villavicencio. He wrote, "My head began to swim, and I entered on an aerial voyage and saw magnificent cities, charming landscapes, and ended up fighting the beasts." Villavicencio said that the Indians used ayahuasca to foretell the future, discover the truth, and prepare deliberations on war, among others. When anthropologists finally made it to the Amazon at the beginning of the 20th century, they advanced prudently when ayahuasca is concerned. Theodor Koch-Grimberg, the German ethnologist, published an account of his ayahuasca experience in 1909, and it's only 2 lines long. He says he saw intense lights and red flames. In 1921, French anthropologist P. Reinberg provided the first lengthy account by a Western scientist of his ayahuasca experience. This was ayahuasca prepared for him by an unidentified Indian in the Peruvian Amazon. According to Reinberg's description, he says he felt poison.